So this is our Google Analytics 4 presentation. We're also going to touch on Google Tag Manager for you. We do, on the next slide, we've got a couple things that we wanted to make sure you already know. We presume that you have this knowledge, but just in case, I'm going to put it out there for you. Google Analytics tracks visitor data to your site using a JavaScript code that's included on every page on your site. And it's really focused on tracking three main things. Page views, so those are the hits that are sent each time someone visits one of your pages. It includes things like what device they visited on, what browsers they're using, and also shows you which pages and how many pages. They're also tracking events, which is when a visitor does something on your site. So they might, for instance, fill in a form, click a link, or play a video. And then the third thing is tracking transactions. So on our sites, that would likely be a donation. Information such as we get information like what pages the visitor went to before they hit that transaction button. And things like what did they actually donate, or if it's an e-commerce situation, what did they actually buy? How much money did they spend? As you have heard, Google is replacing Universal Analytics, which is what's likely on your site right now, with Google Analytics 4 on July 1st. And Google Analytics 4 is very different from Universal Analytics. I did have my final bullet here was that you needed to set up GA4 by July 1st in order to keep tracking data. But literally a half an hour ago, I received an email from Google saying, oh, they're going to automatically set up a GA4 account for every Universal Analytics account that exists that doesn't already have a GA4 property associated with it. So they have some machines going to go and proliferate these all through the internet. That said, in their announcement, they said they strongly recommend that you do it manually because they don't track perfectly from Universal Analytics to GA4. And thus, it's a very blunt object, this tool that they're using to create them. So they said, do it on your own. They have this safety net in case you don't. I also personally, I'll go on record to say I have my doubts that they'll be able to complete this mass migration, given that there must be millions of websites out there that have Google Analytics running on them. So between now, April 1 and July 1, that seems like very short time. So these are the things we want to make sure you know about analytics before we get started. And I will turn it over to Deontay now.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I am Deontay Wilkinson, the CTO here over at Cornershop. I have met a good amount of you, but to the people I haven't met yet, it's nice to meet you. So we've actually been doing these Friday WordPress trainings for a couple of months now, and this is our first one that we're going ahead and presenting to clients just because we thought GA4 would be a good one to talk about with a lot of people since it is such a relevant subject. And like all of our presentations, when we do a Friday training, we're actually going to start off with what we call a joke break. So the first joke of the day is, what do you call a doctor who graduated online? I'll leave it up to anybody to guess. You can just post your answers in the comments. Unfortunately, there's no prize if you do get the right answer at all, but it is helpful to know if you happen to get the right answer. Please feel free to post it in the comments. I'll give it a few seconds and let you all do that. That is right, Susan. Yes, it is called a Google Doc. That is a doctor who got graduated online. So good one. Chiropractor, that is also another one, but Google Doc is the correct answer. So let's start off to actually get into the history of Google Analytics. So Google Analytics, Google Analytics was not actually invented by Google at all. Prior to when Google purchased the analytics software in 2005, it was actually just called Urchin. So Urchin became one of the primary ways of tracking analytics online. It was invented by this company named Quantified Systems that was founded in 1995. And Urchin was a paid product up until 2005, where they happened to run into the people, the founders of Google, at a data conference. And Google was so impressed by the product that they decided to actually purchase and acquire it. So the first version of Google Analytics was actually the sixth version of Urchin itself. So in 2005, Google purchased it. And until 2012, that version of Urchin 6 was still running on I was still running within what we would call classic analytics. And Urchin were actually the first people to invent any sort of UTM tracking. So if you're familiar with UTM tracking, like UTM source, UTM medium, UTM content, UTM actually does stand for Urchin Tracking Module, which I actually found quite useful because I never even bothered to know what UTM actually stood for, but Urchin were the people who actually invented it. And the reason I show this graph is because in 2007, Google invented what we would call classic analytics. And classic analytics was invented in 2007 and was actually running from all the way until 2016. And in 2012, Google introduced Universal Analytics, and that is going to be running from 2012 into 2023. And in 2020, Google introduced Google Analytics 4. So as you can see from this table, that Google has actually had a long history of supporting older versions of Google Analytics before they decided to deprecate the older version for the newest version. So this is actually the shortest timeline between when Google has introduced a product, GA4, and when Google has decided to completely phase out universal analytics. So one of the key goals of GA4 versus previous versions of analytics is one of the reasons that Google has changed it is due to how data is actually tracked. So Google is rolled out Google Analytics in order to track both website traffic and app traffic. So the apps on your phone, previous to Google Analytics 4, you needed to have universal analytics for your website and a completely different tool called Firebase in order to track your traffic within Google Analytics prior to GA4. So with GA4, it's meant to actually help track traffic both across an app and across a website as well. So let's get into what has changed between the two versions of analytics. So everything has changed, and yet it's pretty much the exact same thing. For most people and most nonprofits and most websites in general, there's really no major difference between Universal and Google Analytics 4. A lot of the time, people just use Google Analytics to look at their page traffic, look at what's the most popular pages on their website, seeing how people are entering in, how people are exiting their website. So the most important data is still there. So sessions still exist, page views still exist, traffic, visitor information, including popular devices, location, browser, referrals, like social media too. Social media is also tracked in GA4. The default reports, custom events, and goals, which have been renamed to conversions. The bonus is that the data actually shows up closer in real time than it did in older versions of analytics. So classic analytics, universal analytics, the data would take a few hours to actually show up within Google Analytics, but in GA4, it actually shows up much closer to real time. So that is one of the biggest benefits to it as well. But to talk about the things that have changed, it's mostly the interface that has changed and the focus on what Google looks at when you look at a lot of the default reports of Google Analytics. So the biggest difference is the all pages report. So in prior versions of Google Analytics, that universal analytics on the left-hand side, you could easily drill down into the most popular pages reports. So you can look at all pages and then view all of the traffic related to that. In GA4, the all pages reports is now featured as an engagement and not particularly as a behavior of a user. So Universal Analytics, like GA4, a lot of the traffic and patterns are the same. It just is a different way of viewing the data. So you no longer get this beautiful timeline that tracks across the entire page. It now features a much smaller graph, but it also features a bar of your most popular pages as well. Finding reports in previous versions of Google Analytics. So this is Universal Analytics once again on the left-hand side. You could easily find the reports on your website by looking at the left-hand sidebar. So you could go into the left-hand sidebar and see the previous reports by going to audience, acquisition, or behavior, and all of the reports are listed there. But in the newest version of Google Analytics GA4, all the reports and most popular reports are actually hidden into this little area on the left-hand sidebar called Library. And if you click on that, you'll see that all of those prior reports are still there. I won't say all, most of the prior reports are still there. They're still rolling out new reports to match what Universal Analytics had every single day. So you just click on that, and that's how you view all of the old reports within GA4. It just makes it a little tougher to find it because, like I said, it less focuses on user sessions, and GA4 focuses way more on user behavior than previous versions of analytics. So tracking social media traffic, I know this was a question that we have received before. Yes, you can actually track social media traffic on your website, but it is not the default view in the traffic acquisition report. So if you've ever tried to look at Universal Analytics and you could see all of your traffic acquisition reports, you could easily drill down to see what is your most popular social networks that are directing traffic to your website. So the left-hand side, we can easily see that Facebook, Google Organic, and Facebook Mobile are usually the most popular like referrals, like social referrals of a website. And GA4, it's a little harder to actually see those referrals, but you actually can do it by adding a secondary dimension to the traffic acquisition report. So the default traffic acquisition report, it does not actually show the URL that referred you to like that the referral was coming from. But if you add a secondary dimension and click on session source medium, it will actually show you that kind of information. So the traffic acquisition report only shows things like paid traffic, paid social, organic search, paid search, direct traffic, email, all of that. But in order to actually see the social media traffic, you just have to add that secondary dimension to it. And we've actually created a nice little Google spreadsheet where you can track, where you can start entering in things like UTM tags and start tracking that now. So I'll quickly post that link into the chat so you all can click on it. All it is a generator that will take the final URL and you can start appending in UTM data like the UTM term, UTM content, and all of that. And directly, it will create that final URL. So we received a question that was asking, can GA4 actually track the specific post that generated the traffic? And the answer is no, unfortunately. GA4 does not have the ability to track the specific post that a referral came from. And that just has to do less with GA4 and more so with how social media actually refers the traffic to your website. So whenever any social media company refers to traffic like Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, they don't actually have any sort of, they don't put any sort of thing within the URL to say this piece of traffic came from this URL or this post. So in order to do that, the best thing that you should do is for each posting that you have or each social media website that you want to paste the URL on, it's best to create a specific tag or a specific UTM for that particular URL. That way you can start tracking traffic within the UTM report of GA4. Next, we're also going to talk about the other differences between UA and GA4. So the good thing is it can track user data both across apps and multiple websites in the same property. The bad is you cannot easily create a view like you could in Universal Analytics. I know this was a very popular thing in Universal Analytics where you can start, you can create a view to say, I want to ignore all internal traffic from my website. So this is great if you all work in a specific office with a static IP address and you want to make sure that you're only looking at the page traffic that's being generated from external site visitors. So you can't easily do that within GA4, but you can, if you do have the ability to do that, it's just not as easy to set up that specific view within GA4 like you could in UA. GA4 also can track a lot of data by default out of the box if configured correctly. The bad is, like I said before, the UI is very different from Universal Analytics. You can easily build free-form reports using the new explorations feature, which we're going to get into a little later, what explorations are and what they can do. The bad is that custom dashboards from UA cannot be transferred and will not be cannot be recreated in GA4. They'll need to be manually recreated, so you can't use Google Setup Assistant or to do that. You just have to manually do that. Another great thing is events can track a lot more parameters compared to older versions of Google Analytics. The bad is that custom events do need to be manually added to GA4 before they can be tracked. And we'll get into what custom events are and what you can actually use them for later on. To continue with the good versus bad, cross-domain tracking is set up by default in GA4. So cross-domain tracking is useful if you have multiple domains and you want to track it in a single Google Analytics account. In previous versions of Analytics, you would have to use a good amount of trickery and wizardry in order to do that by setting up a completely different view. But in GA4, cross-domain tracking is set up by default. So this is great if you want to see something like your CRM traffic or like your engaging networks donation forms or your salsa or every action donation form traffic within a single GA4 property, along with your website traffic. That sort of cross-domain tracking is set up by default. Events are harder to track down in GA4 than they are in UA. Something else new is the insight reports. Another bad thing, like I said before, you have to manually create events before you track them. And the great thing with Google Analytics 4 is that there's no conversion event limits. So in previous versions of Google Analytics, your goals, you could only track up to 20 goals at a time. Within GA4, you couldn't do, within GA4, you're unlimited to the amount of goals that you can track within GA4 versus Universal Analytics. So let's talk about tracking a custom event in GA4. So like I said before, in previous versions of Google Analytics, all you had to do was create the custom event within JavaScript, and those events would be automatically tracked in Universal Analytics and Classic Analytics and Urchin as well. But in the newest versions of Google Analytics GA4, you actually have to register a custom event before you can even track it. So this is bad because if you try to start sending a custom event over to GA4 before you actually register it, Google is going to have no idea what to actually do with this data. That data is not going to show up in your reports, and you're going to have no idea whether or not anyone ever actually executed on that custom event. The caveat is, like I said, you're going to have no idea if anyone actually executed on that event before you actually register the event within GA4. But custom events are great because they allow you to track things like custom actions. So let's say that you want to track how many people click on a donation button, or how many people are submitting your form on your website, or how much people are donating whenever they fill out your donation forms. A custom event is great for tracking that kind of information so you can see your conversion rate. And conversion rate is a very important metric to track because you can see how well people are converting on your website for the actions that you deem to be important on your website. So continuing with the idea of tracking a custom conversion or custom event within Google Analytics. So let's say that you wanted to track how many times someone submitted. In this example that we have a client, IFA, who wanted to track how many people submitted their art contests form on their website. So we could easily track how many people actually submitted that form on their website because they were using Google Ads in order to display, in order to promote this art form on their website, and they wanted to track how many people were converting that. So we set up a custom event within Google Analytics to track how many people were actually converting on that, and they're able to report on that within Google Analytics and also within Google Ads. So to continue with the trend of talking about custom events, as I said before in previous versions of Universal Analytics, your events were kind of limited as to what you could track. You were limited to 4 parameters that you could track. So these were the event category, the event label, the event name, and the event value. In Google Analytics 4, the amount of parameters that you could pass to a custom event is increased much more dramatically. Now you can track up to 25 custom parameters within a custom event. And this is very useful if you want to kind of drill down into like the specifics of the event that you want to track. So I'm going to talk about a specific example that we have for one of our clients. So we have this client named Penny Appeal, and they have this nice little custom created donation widget that they have on their website. So with this donation widget, they actually list multiple donation widgets on a specific page. So as you can see here, they have one for donating $2,900 to help build a deep water well, another one for $425 to help build a hand pump, and another $1,000 towards a solar power and water center. So one of the great things about GA4 is that they can easily start tracking this data within Universal Analytics. So by tracking all of these custom parameters, they can start drilling down and see how these widgets compare to one another. So they can start seeing how does the deep water well conversion rate compare to the hand pump conversion rate, or how much does the solar power conversion rate compare to the hand pump conversion rate as well. So within Google Analytics, with these specific widgets, we can start tracking things like which campaign the visitor interacted with, the donation amount that they selected, how much they actually selected, whether or not they were going to be a monthly donor or a one-time donor. We can get the label of the donation amount. So let's say that they wanted to do sort of A/B tests of testing which label performs better than the other. So they can put here, like, donate a specific part of a deep water well. We can also track which country that the person selected to give the donation to, because I track what the submit label is. So let's say they wanted to A/B test whether donate works better than give. We can track things like that within a single event within Google Analytics. We can also track the donation form URL. We can track the campaign icon. So let's say that they wanted to test which icon performed better than the others. And we can also track which location that the person clicked on. So let's say that they wanted to have this widget in the header of their website, or in the footer of their website, or in the main content of their website. We could easily track that kind of information within Google Analytics to see that custom event. And within Google Analytics, they can do a fine-grained compare and contrast to see exactly which campaign performs better than the other. In previous versions of Google Analytics, they would have just been limited to 4 parameters. So they can maybe track whether someone interacted with the donation widget, which donation widget they interacted with, which button label performed better, and how much the person decided to give. Now, they're not able to get into that fine-grained amount of data that you could do with Google Analytics 4. So I'm going to pause here and get to our next joke. So like I said, we do like to do these joke breaks in between each of our slideshows. So I'm going to get into the next joke. So next one, who is the father of data? Can anyone guess who is the father of data? Once again, Susan is right. It is data. Yes, that is correct. Data is the father of data. So nice one, Susan. Susan is on the ball today. Susan is on the board. I love it. All right, so let's get to talk about what custom explorations are. So as I mentioned earlier, explorations are a new feature of Google Analytics 4. So explorations are like regular reports on steroids is how I compare these two. So explorations help to provide actionable insights into your web data. Is arguably one of the most important parts of GA4. So similar to built-in reports, explorations give you a different level of granularity into your data. So we built a custom exploration for one of our clients, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, who is actually joining us on this call. So thank you for allowing us to share what the work that we did for you. One of the things that they wanted to do was to track how much, like how well their donation forms were converting. So what we did was build a custom exploration for them and added in a couple of custom JavaScript events in order to see how far people were getting down the donation path. So we started measuring these donation form performance as if it was an e-commerce site. So things like adding things to the cart or whether the visitor visited the form, how far people made it into the form. We started doing things like that. So I was just going to show you here what one of their donation forms look like. So as you can see on the left, we have a screenshot of the donation form, and on the right, we have things like what it is that the person was doing. So the first step of this custom exploration is it actually looks at whether or not the donation form loaded at all. So we're going to say that's step number one of how far someone made it down the donation path. The second step is the visitor starts filling out the donation form by selecting a donation amount. So they can select one of the pre-selected donation amounts, so they can enter in a custom donation amount. So we wanted to see how much people fell off in between each of those steps. So as you can see here from the data, a lot of people actually loaded the donation form, but there was a steep drop off in whether or not someone actually started filling out the donation form. So Google Analytics 4 allows you to see that out of all those people that loaded the donation form, there is a drop off of X amount of people, and we get further down those steps as well. The third step is that the user starts entering in their contact information. And one of the great things about this is it shows the abandonment rate under it. So once the user starts adding contact information, how many people drop off is actually decreasing. So as they move further along each step of this donation process, you can see the conversion rate increases as they get a little further. The fourth step is the person adding an address, their billing information. The fifth step is the user adding in their credit card information. And there's not much of a drop off between when the person adds their credit card information and how many people actually press the form submission. So this is one of the custom reports that you can build within Google Analytics called Explorations. It allows you to get into that kind of granular data to see how well your donation forms are performing. We have built several other explorations for our clients, ones that get into how well the YouTube videos are performing on things like mobile devices. But this is probably one of the more advanced and really cool ones, so we can actually measure how well these things are going for a lot of nonprofits. Donations are very important for them. All right, so let's talk about audience and what they are. So in GA4, similar to previous versions of GA, audiences are a very important feature. So audience allows you to sort of segment your visitors into a useful subset. So you can compare and contrast their behavior. You can compare things like age range, the sequence of events, so you can easily build an audience by that. So you can say if someone performed X, like X thing, or if someone performed all of these steps, I want to add them into a particular audience within GA4 so I can see how they perform across the rest of my website. So looking into that exploration that we built for NTHP, we could see if someone filled out a donation form, I want to put them into a certain segment within GA4. I want to say this audience member performs these actions on my website versus the people that don't make a donation on my website. I can see how well the people that are on my website who almost made a donation compared to the people who actually made a donation on my website. So you can get into that kind of information. So another thing about audiences, you need to create the audience before you actually start wanting to track the audience. So let's say that I didn't create the audience, I wanted to look at data before I created the audience. I couldn't do that because the audience needs to be created first before I start tracking and comparing their information within GA4. So another great thing about Google Analytics 4 is all of the integrations that can take place within Google Analytics. So because Google Analytics is a Google product, it happens to work well with connecting with all of the other systems within the Google ecosystem. So things like Google Ads, Google Optimize, Search Console, Google Ad Manager, Looker Studio, which if some of you are familiar with it, which is formerly known as Google Data Studio, BigQuery, the Google Display 360 network, Salesforce Marketing Cloud, Play integration, and search ads. And there are actually way more services that GA4 can integrate with, way more than I can actually list in this single slide. So let's talk about integrating some of those services within GA4. So one of the most popular services to integrate with it is Google Search. So let's say that I wanted to see my Google Search Console traffic within Google Analytics. The great thing is I can easily see things like organic search performance directly within Google Analytics. So by default, Google Analytics 4, by default, GA4 does not show you the things like search traffic or the search terms that people came by your website. All of that information is stored in a separate service called Google Search Console. So you can easily integrate that thing within GA4. Now, there are certain downsides and benefits to integrating that information with the GA4. One of the great things is you can see organic traffic. Another thing is you also get this extra useful bar chart. It's kind of useful, but for the most part, I'm not going to say bad, but not as useful. Google Search Console only keeps data for 16 months. So Google Analytics can only examine your search data for those 16 months. The only dimensions that you compare within Google Analytics is things like the landing page, device, and country. They're available for reporting, but none of the other data dimensions are available for reporting. Saying that, I can't do things like compare which country a person made a search from, or I can't compare things like if a person entered in this search term in order to reach my website, how well does that search term compare to whether or not someone made a donation on my website, or whether someone interacted with any other event on my website? That limitation is within Google Analytics 4. I can't do that sort of reporting within Google Analytics 4. So yes, there is a usefulness in connecting Google Search Console within Google Analytics 4, but it's not going to give you as much information as you were hoping to receive by connecting Google Search Console with Google Analytics 4. One of the other most popular services to connect is things like Google Ads. So if you ever have like Google Grants or Google Ads at all, you can integrate that traffic and all of that information within Google Analytics. So you can do things like report on some new dimensions like the ad format, the ad source, and the ad unit. New metrics for reporting like ad impressions, so you can report on how many people clicked on an ad versus other metrics on your website, and compare and contrast an ad click to some sort of like performance for some events or conversion event on your website. And bad thing is you can't manage your ad calls. So there is a lot of upside to integrating Google Ads with Google Analytics, way more than compared with integrating Google Search Console with Google Analytics. And another thing is integrating Looker Studio, so formerly Google Data Studio with Google Analytics. We do have a couple of clients that do use Looker Studio, formerly Google Data Studio. And one of the questions that we have is whether or not those Looker Studio reports will actually continue to work with GA4. So there should be not much of a change between integrating Looker Studio with GA4. I'll put a star there because Google has been very hushy or sketchy on exactly what has changed. I've heard reports that a couple of the reports have stopped working, but I've heard that you can easily start reconfiguring it to work. I'll talk about this later on, but UA will stop being collected on July 1st, 2021. So any graphs based on UA I will stop reporting that new information within Google Looker Studio. Since GA4 collects more granular data in small events, your visuals may be more thorough because you're collecting way more data with GA4 versus Universal Analytics. I'll talk about this as well, but UA may stop working altogether on July 1st, 2024. So let's talk about the actual migration from Universal Analytics to GA4. So I'm going to put here, it's mostly bad. It's just because of the main differences between Universal Analytics and GA4. You cannot migrate over historical data from UA to GA4. GA4 is so different in its underlying technology and how data is stored. I can't do things like say, I want to take my old page views and put them into GA4 and have that data be in there. The best thing you can do is to export out that old previous data from UA and save it in something like Looker Studio or within a PDF or a CSV. Another thing I said before is you can't migrate custom dashboards, custom reports, custom events, filtered views, content groups, or any sort of other custom dashboards from UA to GA4. A benefit is that you actually can migrate your goals from GA4, not the historical data and the conversion rate related to those goals, but you can actually migrate the goals themselves. Only destination goals and some event goals and audiences as well, you can migrate those, but things like a custom goal that relies on a specific set of events in order to be fired off, that configuration won't get migrated over into a conversion event within UA within GA4 using Google's custom migration wizard, but those events can usually be set up. And like I said before, UA will stop tracking data on July 1st, 2023, and all of that old data may be deleted altogether on July 1st, 2024. So on July 1st, 2024, trying to access your old Universal Analytics reports, you will probably not be able to see that. The reason I say may is because Google has said that it may be deleting that data. It hasn't said that it will, it just may. So be wary that all of those old Universal Analytics information may be completely gone by July 1st, 2024. Let's talk about exporting your data from Universal Analytics. So as I said before, one of the best things you can do if you want to preserve all of that GA4, all of that old UA data before GA4 completely wipes it out, is that you can actually perform a PDF, a Google Sheets reports, or an Excel or a CSV report. Another idea is to also take that information from UA and export it into Looker Studio. So here I set up an example of actually what that could look like. You can replicate the old graph and the old reporting from Universal Analytics within a Looker Studio report. So the way I built this was by going into Universal Analytics, making a Google Sheet export of all of the page views from Universal Analytics from July 1st, 2022, all the way down to December 1st, 2022, taking that information, putting it into a Google Sheet, importing that information into a Looker Studio report, and then just recreating what the report of Universal Analytics looks like. It's actually not super difficult to do. So if you wanted to preserve your old data and see how your traffic performed previously to the traffic that's now reporting within GA4, you can build this report and filter down within Looker Studio. So before I get into other information and start talking about Google Tag Manager, I wanted to get into another joke break. What is the spookiest data type? Going to leave less time for this because we actually do have a lot to talk about with Google Tag Manager. Just a couple of slides, and then we'll have plenty of room left to answer your specific questions. So if anyone wants to post an answer, please post it in the chat. Give it a few more seconds. Boolean is the right answer. So if you were thinking that, you could have typed it, but Boolean is the spookiest data type. So let's get into talking about what GA4 is versus Google Tag Manager. So this is the difference between a Mini Cooper and a Rocket. So Google Analytics in GA4 is for tracking website and app traffic. Google Tag Manager is useful for sending trackable events to GA4. So I put it this way, that Google Tag Manager is built on two main components, tags and triggers. The relationship between a tag and a trigger is do X thing when Y thing happens. do X thing tag, when Y things happens is the trigger. It's very useful. Third component is variables, but you don't actually need variables in order to work with Google Tag Manager. So Google Tag Manager is great if you want to send your data, not only put that data within Google Analytics 4, but let's say that you wanted to send your data over to a bunch of other third-party tools like Adobe Analytics or into Google Ads, or you wanted to send that information over to like a Facebook tracking pixel. You can do all of that and set that up within Google Tag Manager. So Google configuring, one of the most basic ways of deploying Google Tag Manager is simply by deploying Google Analytics 4 within Google Tag Manager. It's pretty easy to do this. You just select Google Analytics 4 configuration type, put in your container ID, and select that you want your Google Analytics 4 tag to fire once per page, selecting all pages. One of the other great things about Google Analytics is, Google Tag Manager, is that it's been built on this idea of deploying tags. So when you deploy a tag within Google Tag Manager, it allows you to see the previous versions of Google Tag Manager that were deployed. So it allows you to easily roll back to previous versions of a tag. So within Tag Manager, you could do things like a custom HTML code or something. You can pretty much do a lot of things within Google Tag Manager, write custom JavaScript, build custom HTML. You can build almost an entire custom functionality within Google Tag Manager. So when you publish a tag, you add things like the title, the description, what has changed, and why it was changed. And as I said before, you can roll back into previous versions of a deployed tag. So let's say you broke something with Google Tag Manager and you wanted to roll that back to the previous version. Google Tag Manager lists all of the previous versions of a tag that were deployed. As you can see here, getting back into one of our clients' IFA, they have deployed a lot of tags and have a lot of variables and a lot of triggers. So this is very useful for tracking what the previous versions of the tag were and what has actually changed between one tag and another tag. Google Tag Manager has several different types set up. It has 80 different tag types. It can work with Google Ads conversion, Google Ads remarketing, Google Optimize, Facebook pixel, Pinterest tag, a Hotjar tag, a LinkedIn tag. It works with all of these services that are not Google at all. So it's a very useful thing to set up if you want to start getting into more advanced things within the Google ecosystem outside of Google Analytics 4. So if you use any of these services, it's useful to explore what Google Tag Manager can actually do for you. Google Tag Manager has several trigger types. Form conversions, form submissions. It can track scroll depth. It can track how much people interact with a YouTube video. It can track on page views, when the DOM is ready, when a window is loaded. It can track things like links. And let's say that I wanted to track things like a donation button within GA4. Google Tag Manager actually makes that pretty easy to do. So let's say I wanted to track a button when anyone clicks on my contact us form. So if they interact with any sort of URL that has the word contact in it, I can track that as a custom event within Google Analytics 4 using the Google Tag Manager interface. So I can say when anyone clicks a URL that contains the word contact in it, I want to track a custom event named contact us button. Within GA4, I see this nice pretty interface of GTM, set up that sort of conversion tracking or event tracking, and that information would be tracked within GA4. I don't need to deploy any sort of custom JavaScript in order to do that. GTM is great because it provides a much easier interface in order to build out things like custom tracking within GA4. Talking about Google Tag Manager's data layer, Google Tag Manager has a very different data layer compared to Google Analytics, but looks very similar. Just the way data pushes up to Google Analytics 4 and Google Tag Manager are just slightly different, but pretty much the same. As I said, I was breezing through the last couple of ones because I wanted to leave a couple of time before in order to get into the QA. So I will hand it over to Leslie to talk about what the Google Analytics services that we can provide to our clients.
Yeah, so whether you're ready to tackle all of this on your own and dig in there, and do all of your transfer of your Universal Analytics property to Google Analytics for yourself, or if you feel like you could use some help there, we would love to help out. We can help you to set up your GA4 property and add Google Tag Manager to your site. We can set up custom events and custom reporting for you. We can set up that custom explorations report to help you understand how folks are navigating. We can help to import that data, that historical data, into a PDF or a CSV or into Looker Studio, whatever's going to be most useful for you going forward to make good decisions from that. We can help you to set up those data visualizations. We can help you to get a Google Ad Grant. We can help you to manage that Google Ad Grant and then to connect it with your Google Analytics account. All of those things. So basically, if you have questions or if there's some stuff that we can help you with, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you're a current customer, we can add this on to what we're currently doing for you. If you're not already working with you, we can set up a contract just for working with Google Analytics, or we can also help you to address other things that are going on your site. So with that, let's turn it over and find out what questions y'all have.
Hey everybody, so my name is Max Zimmer here at Cornershop. I am a developer and digital strategist. It seems that we had 4 questions come through the chat, all by Matt Pugh, so thank you very much. We'll just go straight down in order. The first one that you asked was, do you recommend using the GA4 built-in downloads tracking or setting up file tracking in Google Tag Manager? I would say that this really depends. And I think the answer to a lot of questions with should you use GA4 or GTM would be it depends. In this case, I would say it really does depend on the length of the URL of the file, because GA4, I believe, has a limit of 100 characters, and sometimes those files tend to have very long names. So if it goes beyond that, then you might want to think about transitioning over to GTM so that you can just try and pick out like a path instead of a full URL. The other one would be that if you have file extensions that are not very common. So Google Analytics right out of the box will track anything from a PDF to an Excel spreadsheet. It can even do like some MP4s and some other things. But if you have a rarer file type, then using GTM would be the way to go forward on that. The next question was for custom events. If I have a GTM container that sends events to GA4, then GA4 won't collect the data unless I set up the configuration on GA4's side. So kind of. If you have an event that is being pushed from GTM into Google Analytics 4, it will pick it up, but it might not actually be available within your reports. Similarly, if it's a predefined event, something like add to cart or view item or view search results, those things will automatically be picked up, and you don't want to recreate those in GTM, because then you're going to get one hit from the GTM side and another hit from the actual Google Analytics side, and so then you'd end up with duplicate data, and nobody wants that. So once again, it depends. But for that specific case, just make sure that it's not an already pre-built event. The next question was, do explorations work if the form is loaded through an iframe? Again, it depends. An iframe, if you're not familiar, is basically a way to embed one website in the middle of another website. Because it is a completely separate page that is being loaded, it is not being tracked within what's called the parent page or the containing page for that iframe. In order to track events within an iframe, you actually need to add the tracking code inside of that page. So for example, if you're embedding a CRM form from whatever CRM you might be using, and that embed code is using an iframe, you would have to find a way to include your G tag or data layer or provided script from Google Analytics inside of that iframe for those actions to be tracked. And then there's also some minor caveats about, well, you're visiting one parent page and then you have this child iframe. So how are those being tracked together? And so you do kind of have to do some digging on those to make sure that you're tracking them separately, but also kind of asynchronously. The last question that was submitted by Matt was about audiences. So it says, audiences allow you to tag someone as a particular audience type. I believe this associates with their GA cookie or user and persists as they visit other parts of the site. So to clarify what I'm interpreting that as is, does GA use cookies in order to track them from different pages through the site and track those events and collect those in a like kind of a list of events that they've taken? Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, so like if someone goes through your donation form and ends up donating them, you tag them as an audience type donator. Can you then track them as like a donator then visits these pages and then so you can figure out like where the money's at and where the money's interested in, like in your site?
Got you. So there's kind of a weird thing happening in GA4 these days, which is a good thing in my opinion, that they do use cookies, but they're first-party cookies, so they're trying to step away from using outside data. But they've also implemented some machine learning, and now we are at the dawn of AI and machine learning. And their algorithms try to fill in any gaps that might be missing. So the second part of your question was about if a cookie is cleared from a user's browser, do they fall off the audience? Well, audiences can be retained for a set amount of time. And so those people will stay in there for whatever time frame you've actually set. If that person does clear their cookies, then Google will try its best to identify that person. It's kind of hit or miss, and so this again kind of falls into that it depends sort of category. But it will persist through their entire journey. And if you've set up like a cross-domain tracking and you're tracking from a CRM where you're getting those conversion events coming in, and then they navigate either to or from your main site, then it will actually start persisting through those other domains as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but like, and also, so like with audience, I just wasn't even aware that it existed before. Like, let's say then you tag somebody as like a donator, that you can then use that to track them through their journey throughout the site, saying like, donators go to our financials page, or good donators go to our about us page. Or is that how audiences work?
Yeah, so audiences allow you to break down the people who have visited your site through events, dimensions, and metrics. And you can choose which ones you want. You can make them as unique as possible. You can also set up different segmenting for like different time frames. Like, did they complete this event within 15 minutes or 15 days of that other previous event? And really break it down into like, these are the donors that went to this particular page. I mean, you can get pretty granular with this, with these audiences.
Thank you.
So those were all the questions that I saw that were dropped in the chat. Does anybody have any more questions? Just go ahead and raise your hand. All right.
You're also welcome to email us with any others you have, or if there's any other way that we can help you out. But in the meantime, thanks for spending this hour with us. We love to see all of you. Matt, floor's yours.
Okay, I'm sorry, just from the conversation, the presentation. So GA, the universal, that we will lose our data at some point. Will that be July 1st, or are we losing our data if like so we can't ever go back to it? Like like let's say 2 years from now, we can't go back and see our data. Is that right?
Yeah, that is what Google is saying at this moment, that yes, by January 1st, 2024, it may go away. So yes, your
Yeah.
data will be completely not visible at all. So you will no longer see an ability to go back to that universal analytics property. So the recommended advice is to go into universal analytics and start exporting out that data now. So you can do it as a PDF, a CSV, a Google Sheet, or as I said before, if you want to get even more advanced, you can export it out as a Google Sheet and then take that information and put it into Looker Studio in order to view the same kind of comparison tool that you get within Universal Analytics. So by doing that, you could say, I want to see all of my traffic from 2022, just from May all the way until November. You can do that within Looker Studio as long as you export out that data. But to answer your question, yes, that data is planning on going away because I think Google is like, we're holding on to all this data. It's taking up space within our data center. We want to get rid of it and just be done with it.
But in that frustrating way, they're also being vague about it, and they're probably going to tell us 2 days before that they have a different plan.
Is the export really complicated, or do you just like click an export button, it clicks everything, or do you have to do all this weird configuring to get all the very specific data?
No, so it depends on the export type. So essentially the export is you go in and you look at your old pages. So let's say that you want to look at the old all pages report. All you have to do is go to that pages report, select which dates that you want to make an export for, and then there's a little export button within Universal Analytics that says export, and then from there you select exactly which export type you will want to do. PDFs, one of the benefits of importing into Looker Studio is it kind of gives you that dynamic view if you want to report on traffic from one date to another, but you can also do something like a static export of like, I only want a PDF for my data, or will literally print a PDF along with all the graphs that are currently viewable on the page. It will print something like that out and download it to PDF, CSV, Google Sheet, but the export itself is actually a pretty easy process to do.
But you have to do it for each individual kind of report type, like, right? Like, let's say you're looking at like a geographical data. You have to do one individually for geographical data, and then go to your like devices, like report section, and then do it an individual export for that. Or is it just like everything put together?
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right on the former. You will have to go into each one of them. There's no way within Google Analytics right now to say, I want to download literally all this data and give it to me as individual PDFs or individual CSVs. You have to go into each individual report and export out that sort of data. So I don't think they plan on building any sort of tool to roll that out, but I'm sure there's a super advanced way to say download all of this data. There's just no simple UI in order to pull that off.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions before we say goodbye for this afternoon? All right. Well, goodbye for this afternoon. We'll see you next time. Please don't hesitate to reach out if we can be helpful in any way. All right.
Nice
See
meeting
ya.
you all. Have a great day. Bye.
We are now recording.